Tonight, we are going to step into a quieter part of ancient history, a place where old manuscripts whisper about angels, hidden realms, and a world that existed before the familiar pages of Scripture were finalized. The Book of Enoch is one of the oldest and most unusual texts linked to early Judaism and Christianity. It once circulated widely, quoted by early writers, and preserved in remote communities, yet it never found a home inside the official Bible. The Vatican still treats it with careful distance, describing it as valuable but not inspired. In this video, we will move slowly through the history of this book, how it was written, how it shaped early beliefs, and why it was eventually set aside. There will be no dramatization, only calm, steady exploration. Just let the details unfold naturally, at their own pace, as we examine the text that has remained on the edge of faith for centuries, the text that vanished from the early altar. The Book of Enoch moves quietly through history. It does not stand beside the familiar scriptures in most churches. It rarely appears on public reading lists. Yet fragments of it surface in libraries, monasteries, and excavation sites, showing that it once had a place in early belief. Scholars like August Dillman, who examined the G's manuscripts in the late 1800s, noticed that many early Christian writers quoted it as if it were accepted. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept it in full, translating it between the 4th and 6th centuries. Copies from Qumran, found in the caves of the Dead Sea around 1947, placed it among the oldest religious texts preserved. These fragments matched the later Ethiopian version closely, suggesting a long and steady transmission line. In dull, even sentences, the story of how this book disappeared begins to open. Enoch, described in Genesis 5:21-4 as the man who walked with God and was no more, becomes a guide in the text. He travels through the heavens. He watches the order of stars. He speaks with beings described as watchers. Their presence, more direct and vivid than in the canonical scriptures, caused concern among early leaders. Around the 2nd century, Bishop Serapion of Antioch wrote that some were reading Enoch, thinking it to be of the prophets. His letter suggested caution, noting that the text contained strange visions that could mislead those who took it at face value. The watchers form the central tension. They are described as angels who stepped outside their command. According to the book, 200 descended onto Mount Hermon under a leader named Semjaza. They took wives, taught metallurgy, cosmetics, root cutting, and astronomy. These teachings, described in simple lines, resembled early knowledge that rose quickly across Near Eastern cultures. Their acts produced the Nephilim, described as large and violent. The text says they consumed all the toil of men until famine followed. Historian James Charlesworth noted that the story may reflect fears of early tribes facing forces they could not explain, perhaps tied to sudden changes in settlement patterns near 3000 BCE. As the text moves on, it shifts into long descriptions of fixed courses for winds, paths for the sun, gates for the moon. These lists resemble the older Babylonian MUL, Apin tablets. The Book of Enoch places these patterns in the language of journeys. Enoch walks through halls of frost, chambers of deep fire, and vaults of stored winds. The lack of metaphor makes these passages unusual. They read like a record of observation rather than a symbolic vision. This tone set it apart from most early scriptures, which tended to use poetry or narrative structure. Church councils in the 4th century began shaping the Bible used today. The Synod of Laodicea, held around 363 to 364 CE, produced a list of approved readings. Enoch did not appear. Later, councils followed similar choices. The reasons were not fully written, but several scholars noted concerns. The book described angels with clear hierarchies, tasks, and punishments, which mismatched certain theological positions developing at the time. Augustine wrote that some ancient stories of fallen angels were not to be taken as literal events. Jerome, in his commentary on Titus, wrote that Enoch was apocryphal and not used by the Jewish community. The Vatican's caution echoes these early concerns. While the Catholic Church does not ban the book outright today, official documents describe it as non-canonical and theologically uncertain. In 1928, the Pontifical Biblical Commission advised that apocryphal books with unclear origins should not be used to build doctrine. The Book of Enoch fits into this category because its earliest full version comes from Ethiopia rather than from Greek or Hebrew sources kept in Roman archives. The Watcher's narrative raises another issue. The book describes the origin of evil in terms of angelic rebellion and forbidden knowledge. This differs from the dominant doctrine in which human choices form the root of moral disorder. In the Book of Enoch, knowledge itself becomes dangerous. The angel Azazel is blamed for teaching metalwork. Semjaza is blamed for teaching enchantments. The idea that tools, crafts, and astronomy were gifts from fallen beings created tension with the view that human culture grew through divine order and natural progress. Another concern sits in the book's predictions. The Animal Apocalypse, a long section describing the history of Israel through symbolic animals, maps events from the time of Abraham to the Maccabean revolt around 167 BCE. Its accuracy in those earlier events is precise, which led several scholars such as R.H. Charles in 1912 to suggest it was written after some of the events it describes. This raised doubts about prophetic authenticity. Despite these issues, fragments continued circulating. The early writer Tertullian defended the book around 200 CE. He wrote that since Enoch pleased God and was translated, his writings carried weight. But he also admitted that the Jews reject it because it predicted the Messiah too clearly. By the medieval period, Latin scholars copied small quotes without preserving the full text. The book's detailed cosmology and angelology did not fit easily into medieval teachings, which relied on works by Thomas Aquinas and Pseudo-Dionysius that described angels in structured choirs rather than rebellious groups. The rediscovery of the text in the 18th century changed its reach. James Bruce, a Scottish explorer, returned from Ethiopia in 1773 with several copies. Scholars translated it across the next century. The Vatican Library obtained copies in the 1800s, but the caution remained. The concern was not about danger, it was about clarity. The book mixes visions, astronomy, warnings, and historical allegories without clear borders. This makes it difficult to use in teaching and doctrine, which require stable interpretations. Modern researchers continue examining the Qumran fragments. The oldest pieces come from the 2nd century BCE. Their presence among the Dead Sea Scrolls shows that at least one Jewish community valued it. Essene groups near Qumran practiced strict purity laws and studied angelic hierarchies. The Book of Enoch aligns with their interests, especially the sections about heavenly journeys and cosmic order. The Catholic tradition followed a different path, leaning toward texts with broader acceptance across early communities. In recent years, rare Vatican interviews have repeated the same message. The Book of Enoch may be read, but it must be approached as early religious literature, not as scripture. Bishop Corrado Balducci, known for his work on demonology, once commented that Enoch contains themes that require careful distinction from doctrine. His tone remained calm, steady, and plain. The concern is not suppression. It is the desire to avoid confusion among readers who may mistake ancient visions for settled teaching. The story of the Book of Enoch remains quiet. It moves through archives, monasteries, desert caves, and private shelves. Its voice stays steady, describing a world where angels walk across mountain ridges, stars move in fixed lines, and knowledge spreads with both hope and risk. The Vatican's caution echoes past decisions, shaped not by fear, but by the slow, deliberate effort to keep its teachings simple, unified, and clear. The Watchers on Mount Hermon. The Book of Enoch describes a moment that unfolds without urgency. It begins with a simple statement that 200 beings descended upon a ridge. The ridge was Mount Hermon, a tall mountain that crosses the borders of modern Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. Its slopes have snow for long periods each year. In the dry language of ancient observers, the mountain was a place where borders met. Many early cultures used it as a marker between worlds. The text states that the Watchers landed there under a leader named Semjaza. His name appears in the Aramaic fragments from Qumran, written in a steady hand that shows no effort to dramatize the event. When the group gathered, they made an oath. The text says they bound themselves by curses to carry out a plan that none could withdraw from. Around the 3rd century, the scholar Origen noted that stories of angels taking earthly roles existed in Jewish traditions, though he warned that some accounts were not approved by the churches. The Watcher's oath marked a shift from heavenly tasks to human involvement. Their actions were described with simple verbs. They descended, they took wives, they taught knowledge. There is no emotional rise in these lines. It reads like a ledger of steps taken. Semjaza appears as the first figure. The lists that follow record others, such as Amaros, Barakel, Kokabel, and Arakiel. In later centuries, these names were copied into medieval demonological catalogues, although the original text does not describe them as demons. It calls them watchers, a term linked to the Akkadian ear, meaning one who is awake. In Babylonian astronomy, watchers were beings placed over stars. The Book of Enoch uses the word to mark them, as observers assigned to watch over the order of creation. The problem began with their decision to step inside human life. The text records that they taught skills that shaped early culture. Azazel, one of the watchers, is said to have taught metalworking, including the crafting of swords and knives. He also taught the use of certain stones for ornament. Semjaza taught enchantments. Barakel taught astronomy. Penemu taught writing. These teachings appear in simple lists, with no explanations or commentary. Their effect, however, was described as disruptive. The Nephilim, the offspring born from these unions, were recorded as tall and strong. They consumed resources, reflected in the line. They devoured all the toil of men. Archaeologists studying early settlements near the Jordan Valley, such as the site at Tel Es-Safi, have noted periods of sudden growth followed by collapse around 3000 to 2800 BCE. While these patterns match climate and migration shifts, some link the imagery in Enoch to memories of powerful groups entering smaller communities. The Watcher's descent may echo an old attempt to explain a period when new tools, weapons, and farming knowledge arrived rapidly from outside regions. The Book of Enoch moves carefully through the consequences. It states that humans complain to the heavens about violence. The archangels Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel are described as hearing the cries and bringing them upward. In early Christian writings, these four appear often. The Bishop of Sardis Melito mentioned their names while discussing angelic roles in the 2nd century. Their presence in Enoch shows that the book shares roots with several older traditions that later merged into broader beliefs. Mount Hermon's role remains steady in these accounts. Its height made it a place where storms formed. Ancient people watched clouds wrap its summit and used it as a symbol of hidden events. When the Watchers descended, the text states they chose Hermon because it was a solitary mountain, far from the cities. The Aramaic copies use the word Erim, which some interpret as place of oath. Later Jewish writings connected Hermon to boundaries that angels were not meant to cross, though these interpretations developed long after the text was written. The Vatican's cautious view of the Watchers begins here. The narrative describes angels acting with free choice. Their decision to share knowledge conflicts with doctrines that define heavenly beings as fully aligned with divine will. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council stated that angels fell by choice, but church teaching limited these falls to a single event connected to pride. The Book of Enoch, with its list of 200 angels acting in coordinated disobedience, presented a different structure. The text's plain style gives the impression of a recorded event rather than symbolic imagery, which created tension in interpretation. Early Christian writers responded differently. Tertullian accepted the story, writing that the Watchers transmitted a knowledge of sorcery and idolatry. Augustine rejected a literal reading, stating in his City of God that stories of angels taking wives were misunderstandings of human behavior. These debates shaped how the Church approached ancient texts. By the medieval era, Enoch's account remained outside the canon, partly because its angelology diverged from the developing theological line. Despite this, the image of the Watchers left traces. Hermon became a site linked to hidden knowledge. In 1838, the American biblical scholar Edward Robinson visited the mountain and noted ruins on its summit that suggested ancient cult activity. In later decades, explorers found inscriptions in Greek and Latin along Hermon's lower slopes. Some referenced those who swear oaths. Those scholars debate whether these inscriptions relate to the Enochian story or to local rituals. The Watchers also appear in preserved Ge'ez manuscripts in Ethiopia. These texts describe their teachings in more detail. One passage mentions that Semjaza revealed incantations for interpreting dreams. Another describes how Asael taught the crafting of mirrors, which some link to early glassmaking centers near Sidon. These details, recorded in calm lines, show how the book blends cultural memory with spiritual narrative. Modern researchers use the Qumran fragments to trace the story's formation. The fragments show that the Watcher's tale existed in several versions between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. This suggests that the story grew over time, shaped by scribes who preserved older oral traditions. The Dead Sea Scrolls community seemed to value the story as a warning about boundaries, both earthly and cosmic. In Vatican archives, references to the Watchers appear in commentaries rather than official statements. The concern is consistent. The story describes angels in a way that does not align neatly with established teachings. The Church prefers clear roles for angels as messengers, protectors, and worshippers. The Book of Enoch presents them as teachers, wanderers, and rebels. The calm style of the text gives these depictions a directness that made early leaders unsure how to incorporate them without causing confusion. Today, the Watchers remain part of scholarly study. Their story sits between myth, early astronomy, and theological reflection. Mount Hermon still rises quietly over the region, marked by snow and clouds. The tale of those who descended onto its ridge continues to move through history in steady, measured lines, the teachings forbidden to early man. The Book of Enoch records the actions of the Watchers in a tone that resembles a list rather than a story. Their teachings appear one after another, described in flat, unembellished lines. This simplicity makes the passages feel older than the surrounding narrative, as though they preserve memories from a time when skills emerged faster than communities could understand them. The text attributes these skills to individual Watchers, giving each a specific role, and the details remained consistent across the Aramaic fragments from Qumran and the Ge'ez manuscripts preserved in Ethiopia. Azazel stands at the center of the record. The text states that he taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. These words appear without explanation, almost like entries in an instructional ledger. Around the 12th century, the historian Ibn al-Athir wrote about early metalworkers near Mount Hermon who crafted blades from iron bloom. Archaeologists later uncovered forging debris in the same region dating to around 1200 BCE. While these findings belong to a much later period than Enoch's setting, they show that metalwork often appeared in concentrated areas, leading some communities to believe the knowledge arrived from outside forces. The text continues, Azazel is also said to have shown them the metals of the earth and how to work them. This line matches a broader pattern seen across ancient cultures. Skill in metallurgy often appeared suddenly, as seen in Anatolia around 3000 BCE, and in the Caucasus regions slightly later. The association between metal and mystery was common. In 1906, Sir William Ramsay noted that early people often believed metal workers had secret ties to spiritual beings because the craft required fire, precision, and rare minerals. Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers, is recorded as teaching enchantments. The term used in the Gaze text is hush-shaf, which later translations render as spells or bindings. These teachings likely reflect early knowledge of herbal mixtures, dream interpretation, and ritual gestures, rather than supernatural acts. In clay tablets from Mari, dated around 1800 BCE, scribes wrote simple incantations alongside lists of herbs for calming fevers or guiding sleep. The Book of Enoch presents this knowledge as something that crossed a boundary, arriving before communities were ready to separate practical medicine from ritual practice. Another watcher, Barakel, is said to have taught the signs of the stars. This phrase echoes Babylonian astronomical records found in the Mulapin tablets. Those tablets list star paths and rising times in plain, repetitive lines. Early observers used them to track seasons and predict floods. The Book of Enoch describes Enoch walking through gates where winds enter and where stars rise. These passages match Barakel's instruction, suggesting that at least part of the Watcher's knowledge reflected early astronomy. The Vatican has often noted that these sections blend observation with angelic roles in a way that makes them difficult to classify as either symbolic or literal. Kokabel taught the stars, while Arachiel taught the signs of the earth. Arachiel's role has drawn interest from scholars because the phrase signs of the earth appears in a few early texts from Qumran linked to agricultural cycles and soil studies. In 1956, excavators found small jars near Cave 4 that contained pollen samples. Researchers suggested these were used for studying seasonal changes. The idea that a watcher introduced such knowledge may reflect the memory of early agricultural shifts during the Chalcolithic period, when farming techniques spread quickly across the Levant. Penemu taught writing. The Ethiopian version states that he revealed the bitter and the sweet, a phrase that some scholars interpret as the ability to distinguish meanings and record them. Writing changed how communities remembered events. Clay tablets from the city of Ebla, dated to around 2400 BCE, show administrative lists, trade records, and short messages. The Book of Enoch presents writing as one of the forbidden gifts because it allowed people to preserve teachings that once existed only through oral tradition. Kazdeja taught the blows of spirits and demons and the smiting of the embryo in the womb. This line has puzzled researchers for decades. It may refer to early attempts to diagnose miscarriages, childhood illnesses, or seizures. Babylonian medical tablets often attributed diseases to spirits because the causes were unknown. The Book of Enoch describes these teachings as harmful because they gave explanations that could be misused or misunderstood. The Vatican's caution regarding the Book of Enoch includes these teachings. The concern is not about danger, but about clarity. The Church prefers texts where moral and spiritual lessons remain separate from early science. In Enoch, the two blend together. Skills that today are seen as natural parts of human development are shown as the result of beings stepping outside their roles. This structure does not align with the Church's position that human culture grew through divine guidance and human effort, not through knowledge given by rebellious angels. Early Christian writers expressed similar concerns. Clement of Alexandria mentioned Enoch's teachings while discussing the origins of philosophy. He called the book useful but not in the canon, noting that it contained ancient things not suited for all. Later, Bishop Anatolius referred to the astronomical passages while calculating Easter dates around the 3rd century, but he did not cite them as authoritative. The Qumran fragments show that these teachings had strong meaning for one community. The Dead Sea Scrolls group viewed the world as a place where forces of light and darkness acted continually. They studied the motions of stars, wind patterns, and agricultural cycles. The Book of Enoch gave these activities a structured framework. For them, the Watcher's teachings explained why disorder existed and why certain skills carried risk. In the plain tone of the text, each teaching becomes part of a quiet chain of consequences. Knowledge spreads, tools appear, rituals shift, communities change. The Watcher's lessons are not framed as evil, they are framed as premature. The calm, steady way they are recorded makes them feel like echoes of early transitions that shaped the ancient Near East. Today, scholars continue studying the origins of these lists. Some see them as reflections of early technological leaps. Others see them as mythic explanations for why certain skills required caution. The Vatican continues to advise that the Book of Enoch be read as ancient literature rather than as doctrinal text. The line between spiritual narrative and historical memory remains thin, and the teachings recorded in the book move through that space in quiet, measured steps. The rise of the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim in a tone that feels like an inventory. There is no excitement, no rise in emotion. The lines appear as simple records of beings who entered the world through an unnatural path. These passages are short, but their influence reached far across early belief. They shaped ideas about violence, excess, and the collapse of order. The calm structure of the text makes their presence feel steady, as though the events were observed rather than imagined. The origin of the Nephilim comes from the unions between the Watchers and human women. The text states, without pause, that the children born to them grew large and strong. The Old Testament echoes this idea in Genesis 6-4, where it states, "There were giants in the earth in those days." The word Nephilim appears in Hebrew inscriptions from later periods, though always in fragments. In 1962, archaeologists working at Tel Rehof uncovered ostraka with partially preserved lines referring to NPLM, though the context remains unclear. These rare references suggest that memories of unusual groups persisted in local traditions. In Enoch, the Nephilim are not simply tall. The text says they consumed all the toil of men. This line indicates that they strained early settlements through excessive demands on food and resources. A similar pattern appears in older Mesopotamian myths. In the Atrahasis epic, written around the 17th century BCE, early humans multiply and disturb the gods by consuming too much. The gods respond with measures to limit human population. Enoch's description presents the Nephilim as disruptive because their presence destabilized the balance of resources. The text continues in plain sentences. When humans could no longer sustain the Nephilim, the giants turned against animals and then against humans. These actions led to cries rising from the earth. The archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel are described as hearing the cries and bringing them before the Most High. The Gaze manuscript, in a simple line, states, "And the earth brought accusation." This idea appears in later writings such as one Baruch, where natural forces speak as witnesses. Scholars studying settlement patterns in the Levant periods between 3,300 and 2,600 BCE, when certain sites expanded rapidly, followed by sudden declines. At Tel es Safi, thought by some to be ancient Gath, archaeologists found evidence of unusually large structures and weapons that belonged to individuals of taller than average stature. While these findings do not link directly to Enoch's account, they show how early communities may have created memories of powerful groups whose presence shaped local stories. The Book of Enoch continues by describing the judgment of the Nephilim. The text states that Gabriel was assigned to destroy the children of the Watchers. This directive appears in several Qumran fragments. It presents the Nephilim not as demons, but as physical beings subject to mortality. Their destruction comes through conflict rather than through symbolic acts. Later traditions changed this, turning the Nephilim into spirits or corrupted forces, but in Enoch they remain rooted in the physical world. The idea that beings of great size once lived on earth appears across several ancient cultures. The Greeks told of the Gigantes. Early Canaanite stories, preserved in fragments from Ugarit, mention large warriors who guarded sacred sites. Egyptian inscriptions from the reign of Ramses II describe clashes with men of great height in the northern territories. These references do not match Enoch's account directly, but they reflect a broader pattern in Near Eastern memory. The Vatican's caution toward the Book of Enoch includes its treatment of the Nephilim. The Church maintains a clear distinction between humans, angels, and spiritual beings. The idea of hybrid offspring does not appear in canonical doctrine. In 2010, Father Gabriel Amoth noted during an interview that the stories of the Nephilim belong to ancient imagination, not to the teaching of the Church. His tone was calm, reflecting the long-standing position that Enoch's descriptions should be viewed as early literature rather than as theological fact. Yet the Nephilim remained a subject of interest through the centuries. Jewish historian Flavius Josephus mentioned them in his Antiquities of the Jews, stating that bones of large beings were shown in his time. He wrote that their bodies were so large and their faces so different from other men that they were surprising to the sight. While these claims appear in steady prose, many scholars view them as reflections of local legends rather than as historical observations. In 1871, explorer Charles Warren documented large stone chambers beneath the hills near Hebron. Local guides claimed they belonged to the ancients who were tall. Warren wrote the accounts without confirming them, reflecting the same distant tone found in early texts. As the book moves on, it describes what happened after the destruction of the Nephilim. Their spirits, unable to ascend or descend, were said to remain on earth as unclean spirits. This detail appears in later Judaism as a possible source for beliefs about wandering entities. The Vatican notes that these passages contrast with canonical teachings about souls and spiritual order, making the book difficult to integrate into doctrine. The Nephilim function within the Book of Enoch as a turning point. Their rise marks the moment when the world of humans and the world of angels crossed boundaries that were not meant to be crossed. The text explains their presence through plain descriptions. There is no symbolic language. The beings are physical, their actions recorded in direct terms. This clarity made the book influential but also controversial. Fragments from Qumran reveal variations in the Nephilim passages. Some versions refer to them as gibborim, a term used in the Old Testament to describe mighty warriors. Others use Rephaim, a word associated with ancient spirits. The presence of multiple terms shows that the story moved through different communities, each adapting it to their understanding of the past. Modern scholars approach the Nephilim as reflections of historical memory. Some suggest they represent early tribes that entered the Levant during migration periods. Others see them as symbols of excess and imbalance. The Book of Enoch presents them with no such interpretations. It records their existence in sentences that remain steady and simple. The effect is a quiet, methodical unfolding of events that shaped early beliefs about boundaries, knowledge, and the consequences of crossing them. Today, the Nephilim remain part of both academic research and cultural imagination. Their presence in the Book of Enoch continues to attract attention because of the calm certainty with which the text describes them. The Vatican maintains its position that these passages hold historical interest, but not doctrinal authority. The record remains unchanged. The Nephilim rose, acted, and were judged, all presented in the same peaceful, even tone that runs through the entire book. The judgment of the Watchers. The Book of Enoch shifts into a slow, steady passage when it describes the judgment of the Watchers. There is no dramatic rise. The language remains plain. The events move step by step, as though they were written down by a scribe who wished only to record what he heard. This style gives the judgment scenes a quiet weight. The Watchers, once described as beings who observed the world from above, become subjects of a measured legal process carried out in the heavens. The text begins with the cries rising from the earth. Humans, unable to endure the actions of the Nephilim and the teachings of the Watchers, raise their voices. The line in the Ge'ez manuscript states simply, "and the earth complained." This idea appears again in later Jewish writings, where creation itself acts as a witness. The archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel hear the cries and bring them before the Most High. The Qumran fragments preserve these names clearly, written in a neat script that scholars believe dates between 200 and 100 BCE. The judgment proceeds through clear instructions. Michael is told to bind Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers. Gabriel is told to destroy the Nephilim. Raphael is commanded to bind Azazel and cast him into a place of rough stones and darkness. Uriel is sent to warn Noah about the coming flood. These instructions appear not as visions, but as direct commands. The Vatican has often noted that the Book of Enoch presents heavenly processes with unusual specificity. Church doctrine uses broad categories for angelic roles, while Enoch gives detailed assignments. Azazel receives a separate judgment. The text states that he is to be bound hand and foot, then cast into the desert region known as Dudael. In 1936, the archaeologist Nelson Glueck documented ancient sites in the Negev that matched descriptions of barren, stony terrain used for early ritual purposes. While no direct link to Azazel exists, the region shows a long history of associations with purification rites. During the Second Temple period, the scapegoat ritual on Yom Kippur included sending a goat to Azazel in the wilderness. As recorded in Leviticus 16, the Book of Enoch appears to preserve an older version of this idea. Semjaza's judgment appears calmer. Enoch records that he will watch the destruction of his children before facing his own punishment. The text repeats this without emotional emphasis, giving it the tone of a sentence read aloud in a quiet hall. Some scholars, like Lauren Stuckenbrook, have suggested that this structure resembles early Near Eastern legal formulas found in Assyrian tablets. The Watchers are not portrayed as uncontrollable forces, but as beings accountable to law. The archangels' roles serve as an early model for the idea of cosmic order. Michael acts as the one who restrains rebellion. Gabriel oversees the removal of corruption. Raphael heals and restores. Uriel delivers warnings tied to time and cycles. These roles appear again in later Christian writings, though in simplified form. The Vatican's hesitation toward Enoch includes these distinctions. The text assigns tasks that do not align fully with the more uniform hierarchy established later by authors like Pseudo-Dionysius in the 6th century. The Book of Enoch states that the Watchers are to be denied intercession. When they ask Enoch to speak on their behalf, he writes their plea on a tablet and brings it before the throne. After waiting, he receives the answer. Their request is rejected. The line in the manuscript is short. "Your petition shall not be granted unto you." This moment became one of the key reasons early church leaders doubted the book. The idea of angels seeking mercy through a human intermediary conflicted with theological positions forming around the 2nd and 3rd centuries. In 325 CE, during the First Council of Nicaea, discussions about the nature of angels emphasized their spiritual purity, not their vulnerability. Enoch's role in this judgment remains steady throughout the passage. He serves as a messenger between realms. He writes, reads, listens, and records. His movements resemble the tasks of early temple scribes. Excavations at Elephantine, dated to the 5th century BCE, show scribes copying legal and religious texts with the same repetitive patterns found in Enoch. The book presents him not as a prophet, but as a recorder. The Vatican's caution stems partly from this portrayal. Enoch's authority comes from journeys through multiple heavens, where he sees chambers of snow, halls of fire, and vaults of stored winds. These descriptions resemble early cosmological models, but do not match the symbolic language used in canonical texts. A 1901 report from the Pontifical Biblical Commission noted that some writings of antiquity contain vision accounts that do not align with established cosmology. The statement did not name Enoch specifically, but scholars consider it relevant because of the book's prominence in that period. The judgment also includes a decree that the watchers will witness the flood. The text connects their actions with the coming disaster in quiet, direct lines. This differs from Genesis, where the cause of the flood is human wickedness. Enoch attributes it to the mixing of realms. Some early Christian writers, like Justin Martyr, accepted this explanation. Others, like Origen, rejected it, arguing that Scripture should be interpreted according to moral lessons rather than cosmic events. Qumran copies of the judgment section show careful preservation. Scholars found fewer variations here than in other parts of the book. This suggests that the community considered these lines central to their beliefs. They viewed the world as divided between forces of light and forces of corruption. The Watcher's judgment fit into their understanding of history as a series of breaches and repairs. Modern researchers often describe the judgment section as one of the earliest attempts to explain the presence of evil through a structured legal framework. The text does not present a cosmic battle. It presents procedures. Sentences are given. Assignments are carried out. Enoch writes them down. The style resembles an administrative record rather than a myth. For the Vatican, this structure remains one of the reasons to treat the Book of Enoch as valuable but non-canonical. The text gives cosmic authority to a system not found in later doctrine. Angels act like officials in a layered court. Humans, through Enoch, play a role in delivering messages upward. The lines remain steady, simple, and carefully arranged. Today, the judgment of the Watchers remains an area of quiet study. Its influence stretches through early Jewish thought, apocalyptic literature, and later mystical traditions. The calm tone of the Book of Enoch allows the events to unfold without force. Boundaries are named, roles are clarified, sentences are given. Everything moves in measured steps, reflecting a world where order is restored, not through conflict, but through deliberate written decisions. The prophecy to Noah. The Book of Enoch moves into a slow, steady rhythm when it describes the message given to Noah. The text keeps its tone plain, recording events with the same quiet detachment seen in earlier chapters. There is no urgency, even though the subject is a coming flood. Instead, the passage is read like observations collected by someone standing at the edge of a changing world, noting each sign with care. The account begins with Uriel, one of the archangels, receiving a command. The manuscript states simply, "Go to Noah and tell him of the end that approaches." This line appears in the Qumran fragments, written in faded ink but still clear enough to show that the message had been part of the tradition long before the Ethiopian version was translated. In the canonical book of Genesis, Noah receives instructions directly, but Enoch presents a different path. The warning passes from the heavens to an archangel, and then from the archangel toward a human who has not yet been told why he was chosen. Noah is described as seeing signs before he receives the message. The text states that he noticed the earth tilting, a phrase that appears unusual but is preserved consistently across manuscripts. Scholars have linked this detail to early attempts to explain environmental changes. Core samples taken near the ancient settlement of Tel Beersheba show shifts in rainfall patterns around the period traditionally associated with early flood legends. The Book of Enoch does not speak of storms yet. It begins with quiet, gradual changes ground that sinks, winds that shift, and seasons that do not follow their usual order. When Uriel approaches Noah, the scene remains calm. There are no dramatic visions. The manuscript records the archangel's words in a flat tone. A great destruction shall come upon the earth. A flood shall wash away all that has risen in corruption. Unlike Genesis, where the narrative focuses on human wickedness, Enoch ties the flood to the actions of the watchers and the presence of the Nephilim. The prophecy becomes part of the larger sequence of decisions made in the heavenly court. The Vatican has noted this difference. Official commentaries point out that the Book of Enoch places the cause of the flood within the cosmic order, rather than within human morality. Catholic doctrine holds that the flood was a response to human corruption, not the rebellion of angels. This distinction is one reason the Church does not accept Enoch as canonical, although it acknowledges its historical importance. Noah's reaction is recorded without emotion. He listens, he observes. The text says he spoke no answer, a phrase that reflects the ancient writing style of reporting actions without commentary. This mirrors other early Near Eastern figures. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim receives warning of a flood and responds with precise tasks rather than with emotional expressions. Enoch presents Noah in a similar way, quiet, steady, focused on instruction. The prophecy also includes measurements. Uriel tells Noah how long the disruption will last and instructs him on preserving knowledge. The Ge'ez manuscript states that Noah is to write the things that are shown, though this detail does not appear in all versions. Some scholars believe this reflects an older tradition in which flood survivors recorded astronomical and agricultural information to restore order after the disaster. Clay tablets found at Abu Salabik list flood-era kings, followed by simple agricultural instructions, suggesting a link between survival and the preservation of knowledge. Enoch's involvement in the prophecy is indirect. He does not speak to Noah. Instead, Uriel carries the message. This distance reflects a shift in the narrative. Earlier sections present Enoch as the messenger between realms, but here his role is complete. The text moves toward Noah, marking a transition in the story of humanity. Later, Jewish writings follow this pattern. In the Book of Jubilees, Noah receives a similar warning from angels, with Enoch's writings preserved for him to read. The flood is described in brief lines. The Book of Enoch does not dwell on rising waters. It focuses on the reason, not the event. The manuscript says, "The waters shall cleanse the earth of the great disorder." The term disorder appears often in apocalyptic literature from Qumran. It refers to imbalance rather than to moral wrongdoing. This reflects the worldview of the community that preserved the book. They believed that history moved in cycles defined by harmony and disruption. The Vatican maintains that these views differ from established teaching. In 1895, an early Catholic commentary stated that Enoch contains themes that belong to ancient speculation, not to revelation. The tone of the commentary was peaceful, reflecting the Church's gradual, steady approach to ancient texts. The Book of Enoch's treatment of Noah is recognized as culturally significant, but is not used in doctrinal explanations of the flood. Archaeological evidence has added context to the story. Excavations at Ur, Kish, and Shurapak between the 1920 seconds and 1940 seconds revealed thick layers of silt between layers of habitation. These layers suggest large, localized floods that shaped early Mesopotamian memory. While none of these match a global event, they show how flood traditions could develop from real experiences. The Book of Enoch may reflect this process, turning environmental changes into a quiet cosmic narrative. Noah's preparation is described in simple steps. He gathers wood, he shapes beams, he moves slowly, following instructions that were given in short, measured lines. The text does not list the dimensions of the ark, unlike Genesis. It focuses instead on the act of receiving knowledge and responding with obedience. This reflects a theme common in early Jewish literature. Wisdom given at the right time allows survival. The chapter closes with Noah standing on the earth's surface, noticing the sky change color. There is no panic. The description is calm. The manuscript says, "The heavens grew heavy, and Noah understood the time." This simple line brings the prophecy to its quiet turning point. Today, scholars continue to study how Enoch's prophecy influenced later writings. The connection between Uriel's warning and Noah's role appears in several texts from the Second Temple period. The Vatican acknowledges these connections while maintaining its position that the Book of Enoch be read historically rather than theologically. The prophecy remains part of a slow, steady unfolding of events. Noah receives the message, observes the signs, and begins his work. The Book of Enoch presents this moment with the same peaceful tone found throughout the text, allowing the story to flow without sharp emotion or dramatic emphasis. The astronomical books. The Book of Enoch shifts into a different kind of record when it reaches the sections known as the astronomical books. The tone becomes slow and methodical. The passages list movements of stars, paths of the sun, and patterns of the moon with the same calm precision used for recording measurements in a workshop. There is no symbolism attached to these descriptions. Each line reads like an observation written by someone who watched the sky every night and placed each detail in simple order. These sections, often called the Book of the Luminaries, appear in the Qumran fragments in several copies, suggesting they were important to the community that preserved them. Scholars have dated the earliest fragments to around the 3rd century BCE. The Gaze translations show only small differences, which indicates that the astronomical material remained stable across centuries. This stability is unusual for ancient texts and suggests that the material may have been copied from earlier sources, possibly from traditions tied to Babylonian star catalogues. The text begins with Uriel guiding Enoch through chambers where the stars rest before rising. The description uses plain language. These are the leaders of the lights. Enoch is shown 12 portals in the east and 12 in the west. Through these, the sun and moon enter and exit. The passages list how many days the sun travels through each portal. It states that in the first month it enters through the 4th portal, then through the 5th, and so on. This pattern reflects early attempts to organize seasonal cycles. Babylonian MUL. Apin tablets, dated around the 7th century BCE, contain similar lists. They record heliacal risings of stars and seasonal indicators for farming. The Book of Enoch presents a parallel structure, but with an angel acting as the instructor. The Vatican noted this blend of early science and spiritual authority in an 1893 commentary, stating that the text assigns the order of heaven to beings not found in the canonical cosmology. Cool. The moon's movements are described in even greater detail. The text records how its light waxes and wanes. It states that the moon receives light from the sun and that its cycle repeats every 29 or 30 days. These numbers match early lunar calendars discovered at Gezer and Hazor, where archaeologists found markings on stones believed to represent lunar counts. Enoch's description includes statements about the moon's return path, a concept that appears in ancient Egyptian astronomy as well. The sections also describe the winds. 4 major winds are named, each coming from one direction. They are linked to weather patterns, seasonal changes, and events on earth. The passage states, "From the east comes the wind of blessing, from the west comes the wind of restraint." These lines show how early groups connected sky movements with environmental shifts. The Vatican has commented that these ideas reflect pre-scientific cosmology and do not align with later Christian views on natural order. One of the most unusual features of the astronomical books is their emphasis on accuracy. The text states that if the moon does not follow its path, or if the sun enters the wrong portal, the earth will become disordered. This belief matches the worldview found in the Dead Sea Scrolls community. They viewed cosmic order as essential to spiritual order. If the heavenly bodies moved incorrectly, it meant corruption had entered creation. The Book of Enoch uses this framework to show why the actions of the Watchers threatened the balance of the world. These passages caused early church leaders difficulty. The Book of Enoch gives the sun and moon fixed pathways, while later Christian cosmology, influenced by Greek ideas, emphasized spheres and perfect circles. In the 4th century, Basil of Caesarea wrote that discussions of many gates for the sun belonged to ancient imaginations. The Vatican's continuing caution reflects this early critique. The Church prefers cosmological language found in canonical texts, which keeps descriptions simple and symbolic rather than mechanical. Archaeological findings add context. Excavations at the ancient site of Ugarit uncovered a tablet listing the rising times of stars near the solstices. The layout resembles the patterns in Enoch, with sequential entries for each month. This suggests that Enoch's astronomical sections may preserve knowledge from several Near Eastern cultures, woven into a single narrative attributed to Enoch. The Qumran community likely adopted these ideas because they fit their structured calendar system, which used a 364-day year. This 364-day calendar appears repeatedly in the astronomical books. It divides the year into 4 seasons, each with 91 days. The text states plainly, "The year is complete in 364 days." This number troubled early interpreters because it does not match the solar year. The Qumran community nonetheless favored it because it created perfect symmetry, 52 weeks with no remainder. The Vatican has noted that the Book of Enoch promotes a calendar rejected by both Jewish and Christian traditions, which complicates its use in theological settings. The astronomical books also contain descriptions of the storehouses of snow and wind. These passages resemble ideas found in early Mesopotamian and Egyptian cosmology. Clay tablets from Nineveh describe chambers of weather controlled by divine beings. Egyptian tomb paintings depict the sky goddess Nut stretching across the heavens, with stars passing through her body at night. Enoch's version presents these images in calm, observational language. There is no symbolism. The chambers are described as physical structures with fixed locations. This directness makes the text difficult for the Vatican to classify. It uses spiritual beings to explain natural phenomena, but it does so in a way that resembles early science rather than symbolic theology. In a 1961 interview, a Vatican scholar remarked that Enoch speaks of the heavens as though recording a survey, reflecting the concern that the book mixes genres that later Christian doctrine keeps separate. Despite these concerns, the astronomical books hold historical value. They show how ancient groups observed the sky and sought order in its movements. They preserve early attempts to create unified calendars. They record patterns that may have guided farming, travel, and religious festivals. The calm, repetitive structure gives the passages a meditative quality, suitable for quiet reading. The sections end with a reminder that Enoch is to write what he sees. The manuscript says, "These are the laws of the lights which go forth before the Lord." The lines are steady, without embellishment. They show Enoch acting as a recorder, not as an interpreter. Modern scholars continue studying these passages to understand the intersection between astronomy and spirituality in ancient societies. The Vatican still maintains that the Book of Enoch should be treated as historical literature, not as doctrine. The astronomical sections, with their gates, paths, and measured cycles, remain one of the clearest examples of how the book blends observation with celestial order, the seven heavens described. The Book of Enoch enters one of its calmest and most unusual sections when it describes the layered structure of the heavens. The lines move slowly, giving each level a simple description. The style resembles a traveller's log, as though Enoch walked through a series of quiet halls and recorded only what he saw. There is no symbolic language, no dramatic interpretation. The heavens appear as distinct regions, each with its own purpose, arranged in an orderly vertical sequence. The idea of multiple heavens existed long before the Book of Enoch. Babylonian texts refer to several sky levels, each ruled by different deities. Early Persian writings preserve similar ideas, yet Enoch's version is unusually detailed. The Qumran fragments show that these descriptions were part of the text from an early period. The Ge'ez manuscripts preserve them with small variations, confirming that the account held significance through centuries of transmission. The first heaven is described as a place where winds gather. Enoch sees clouds forming there, along with atmospheric forces that move across the earth. The language is plain. It states, "I saw the treasuries of all the winds." This resembles early Mesopotamian ideas found in tablets from Nineveh, where God stored winds in chambers. Archaeologists uncovered these tablets in the mid-1800s, revealing long lists of weather patterns associated with divine activity. Enoch's description reflects this older tradition, but presents it through a quiet observational lens. In the second heaven, Enoch sees darkness, a region where beings await judgment. The text does not describe torment or flames. It simply records that the place is dim and quiet. The beings inside remain unnamed. Later Jewish writings, such as the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, expand this scene, but the earliest Enochic manuscripts are restrained. They present the second heaven as a region of waiting, not punishment. Early church leaders struggled with this, because canonical scripture describes only heaven and hell, not intermediate realms. The Vatican notes in several commentaries that these inner layers do not align with Christian eschatology. The third heaven contains both pleasant and bitter regions. The pleasant part shows gardens, trees, and springs. One tree is described in detail, with a fragrance reaching far beyond its branches. Some scholars compare this to early descriptions of sacred groves in ancient Canaan. Excavations near Tel Dan revealed terraced gardens and water channels dating to the 8th century BCE, suggesting that lush, enclosed spaces held symbolic meaning. The bitter region, however, is dry and cold. The text states that the souls of the unrighteous dwell there until the day of judgment. Again, the language remains simple, giving no emotional charge to the scene. In the fourth heaven, Enoch observes the movements of the sun and moon. This section overlaps with the astronomical books. Uriel shows him how the lights change as they pass through gates. The description includes phrases such as the chariot of the sun and the measures of the moon. These resemble early metaphors found in Egyptian astronomical texts. At the tomb of Seti I, painted ceilings show the sun god Ra travelling across the sky in a boat. Enoch's version, however, is not symbolic. The chariot appears as part of the natural order, a mechanism rather than a deity. The fifth heaven contains the Grigori, a group of angels who appear quiet and solemn. They are described as tall and motionless, standing in rows. The text states that they ceased their singing, suggesting a pause in their duties. Later interpretations associated the Grigori with the Watchers, though the earliest manuscripts do not equate the two directly. Early church scholars questioned this portrayal of angels. In the 4th century, Hilary of Poitiers wrote that angels do not rest from praise, creating a theological tension with Enoch's description. The 6th heaven introduces a group of angels who oversee cosmic order. They write, record, and observe. Enoch sees scribes at long tables, keeping lists of human deeds and natural events. These figures resemble administrative officials more than spiritual beings. The Vatican has commented that this portrayal conflicts with the symbolic roles assigned to angels in Christian tradition. The idea of celestial scribes appears in Babylonian ritual texts and in Persian Zoroastrian writings, where heavenly recorders monitor the deeds of humans. Enoch presents this idea in quiet, steady detail. The 7th heaven appears at the top of the structure. Enoch describes it as brighter than the other levels. The manuscript states that light there is sevenfold. The archangels move there. Thrones appear. The Most High is described as surrounded by streams of fire, yet the description remains simple, without elaborate metaphor. The plainness of the scene made early church leaders cautious. In canonical scripture, direct descriptions of the divine realm are rare. Enoch offers a detailed tour. In the early centuries, this raised concerns. Some theologians argued that such specificity could blur the boundary between vision and doctrine. The structure of the 7 heavens differs from the Christian view that later developed. By the 6th century, Pseudo-Dionysius described 9 choirs of angels arranged in hierarchies. Medieval theologians used this system for centuries. The Book of Enoch, however, presents a linear sequence of heavens, each with its own tasks. The Vatican notes that the book's cosmology does not fit the pattern preserved in canonical revelation, but it acknowledges that such descriptions help historians understand early religious thought. Archaeological research gives context to these layered heavens. Tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal list several sky levels tied to the movements of the stars. Egyptian cosmology divides the sky into multiple regions governed by protective deities. Persian writings describe 3 heavens. The Book of Enoch may have combined older ideas from these cultures into a unified structure. The Qumran community, which valued order and separation, likely preserved the text because it reflected their belief that creation was divided into clearly defined layers. The Vatican's caution toward the 7 heavens reflects concerns about blending ancient cosmology with spiritual doctrine. In a 1905 analysis, a Catholic scholar wrote, "The heavens of Enoch belong to the imagination of early peoples and not to the deposit of faith." The tone of the statement is calm, echoing the Church's long-standing approach to non-canonical texts, respect for historical value, but distance from doctrinal authority. Today, scholars study the 7 heavens to understand how ancient groups viewed the structure of the universe. The layers show a world organized through observation, tradition, and quiet reflection. The Book of Enoch presents the heavens as places with tasks, records, and boundaries. Its descriptions remain steady and unembellished, offering a rare glimpse into an early cosmological system that shaped the beliefs of several communities before fading from mainstream use. The 7 heavens continue to draw interest because of the calm clarity with which they are described. They form one of the most distinctive features of the Book of Enoch, and one of the primary reasons the Vatican advises careful reading. The text provides a tour of the unseen world, laid out with the quiet certainty of a scribe writing down what he saw, the fallen stars, and the cosmic prison. The Book of Enoch describes the fate of the rebellious watchers and other fallen beings with the same calm tone found in its earlier sections. The passages do not portray punishment through violent imagery. Instead, they present a structured environment, quiet, cold, and distant, designed to hold those who cross the boundaries set at creation. The descriptions resemble geological observations, landscapes made of stone, deep chambers, and isolated regions where movement is limited. This plainness gives the cosmic prison an unusual stillness. The journey begins when Enoch is taken to a place of chaos. The Qumran fragments preserve this phrase clearly. It refers not to disorder, but to a land without cultivation or settlement. The text describes mountains of hard stone, sharp peaks, and fissures that carry no water. These details suggest real environments. In 1937, archaeologist Nelson Glueck surveyed the southern Negev and documented long stretches of barren volcanic rock. He noted that earlier cultures considered these regions unfit for habitation and often associated them with spiritual exile. Enoch's cosmic prison echoes these landscapes. The text then describes stars that transgress their orders. These stars are not celestial bodies in the modern sense. They represent angelic beings assigned to fixed paths. When they did not follow those paths, they were bound. The manuscript states that they were placed in hollow places with pillars of fire. This phrasing parallels early Babylonian texts that describe fallen deities confined within deep pits. Clay tablets recovered from the ruins of Nineveh record places called the House of Darkness and the Deep Prison, with environmental details similar to those in Enoch. Enoch sees these stars surrounded by walls of glowing stone. The description is consistent across the Gear's manuscripts. The stone does not burn, but produces steady light. Some scholars link this imagery to obsidian fields found in regions east of the Jordan River. In 1948, surveys of the Jebel Druze area revealed dark, glassy rock formations that hold heat and shimmer under sunlight. The Book of Enoch presents these features in simple lines, observing them as part of the cosmic landscape rather than as symbolic objects. Azazel's confinement appears separately. The text says he was thrown into a region of sharp stones and deep darkness. The place is called Dudael. Though its exact location remains unknown, the term resembles Hebrew roots associated with wilderness areas. The Vatican has noted that this section may preserve an early form of the scapegoat ritual mentioned in Leviticus, where a goat is sent to Azazel in the wilderness. Early church commentators discussed this passage cautiously. In the 4th century, Jerome wrote that certain ancient texts ascribe too much to fallen angels, referencing ideas like these. The cosmic prison differs from later Christian concepts of hell. There is no fire consuming the beings held there. No torment is described. The text says only that they are bound until the final judgment. These beings do not speak. They do not attempt escape. The environment itself restrains them. This quiet portrayal made early church leaders hesitant to incorporate Enoch's descriptions into discussions of angels and punishment. Canonical scripture uses symbolic imagery for judgment rather than architectural descriptions of cosmic locations. The Qumran community valued these passages because they reflected its beliefs about cosmic order. The group saw the universe as divided into sections, each with a purpose. If a being left its assigned realm or failed to maintain its path, it entered disorder. The cosmic prison represents the restoration of boundary and limit. It is not a place of moral torture, but a region where movement stops. This aligns with other writings from the Dead Sea Scrolls that emphasize the separation of light and darkness. Enoch observes that some stars shine dimly within their confinement. The manuscript describes their light as weak and trembling. Early interpreters debated the meaning of this. Some believed it referred to comets or irregular stars that deviated from normal patterns. Others saw it as an image of spiritual decline. The Vatican teaches that angels cannot lose their nature in this way, which contributed to the Church's reluctance toward Enoch's cosmology. The idea of celestial beings fading in brightness did not align with established doctrine. The text also shows Enoch feeling fear for the first time. The line states, "I feared greatly." This admission is rare. Earlier passages describe Enoch walking through heavens and chambers without hesitation. Here, The environment creates stillness that unsettles him. His fear is not dramatic. It is stated in a short, plain line, emphasizing the contrast between the orderly heavens and the silent confinement below. The cosmic prison includes a great chasm with columns of fire rising at intervals. The flames do not consume, they act like markers or boundaries. Scholars compare these descriptions to volcanic fissures along the Syrian-African rift. In 1971, geological studies identified long channels beneath the Golan Heights that once carried magma. These natural formations may have influenced ancient imagery of deep glowing divisions within the earth. One of the most striking statements in this section says, "Here shall they be imprisoned forever." The word forever appears consistently across manuscripts. It suggests a permanent state, not a temporary one. This differs from some early Jewish traditions that describe fallen angels returning at the end of time. Enoch's version gives them no future role. They remain contained until the final judgment, when their fate will be sealed but not changed. The Vatican's caution reflects this finality. In 1928, a Catholic commentary explained that Enoch's view of cosmic punishment assigns jurisdiction to structures not found in revealed doctrine. The commentary noted that Christian teaching does not describe multiple prisons or angelic confinement by natural geography. Instead, it uses moral categories. Enoch, by contrast, presents punishment through physical landscape and boundary. The cosmic prison remains central to the Book of Enoch's worldview. It explains why certain forces no longer act in the world. It presents the cosmos as a system where rebellion is met with containment, not destruction. These beings remain present, but silent. Their stories end not with conflict, but with immobility. Today, researchers study this section to understand early ideas of cosmic geography. The layered heavens above and the confined realms below reflect an ancient attempt to map the unseen world, using familiar features: mountains, valleys, fire, and stone. The Book of Enoch preserves this mapping in quiet, deliberate lines that give shape to a universe organized through separation and restraint. The fallen stars remain in their hollow places. The boundaries stand. The calm language surrounding these scenes shows how the text views order, not through force, but through quiet confinement that restores balance to the world. The messianic figure in Enoch. The Book of Enoch introduces a figure called the Son of Man in a tone that remains steady and plain. The text does not heighten its language. It describes this figure with the same quiet clarity used for the stars, the winds, and the heavenly halls. The presence of the Son of Man becomes one of the most distinctive features of the book. Early Christian writers noticed these passages. Later church authorities handled them with caution because they did not align perfectly with the teachings that became central to Christian doctrine. The earliest references to this figure appear in what scholars call the Parables of Enoch, a section preserved fully only in the Ethiopian manuscripts. These chapters are absent from the Qumran fragments, which suggests they may have been added or expanded after the earliest versions of the text were written. Still, the Ge'ez manuscripts preserve a consistent portrayal. The Son of Man is shown as a chosen figure who exists before creation. The text states, "He was named before the sun and before the stars were made." This statement uses simple language, but reflects a complex idea of pre-existence. The title, Son of Man, appears often in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Ezekiel, where it refers to the human prophet. But in Enoch, the title takes on a different meaning. It refers to a heavenly figure, not an earthly one. The manuscript describes him as seated on a throne of glory. He judges kings. He reveals hidden things. He is described as gentle toward the righteous and firm toward the corrupt. The tone remains modest and even, offering no direct symbolism. Early Christian writers paid attention to these details. In the 2nd century, Justin Martyr wrote that Enoch speaks of one who judges. He suggested that the figure resembled the Messiah. Other writers, including Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria, noted similarities between the Enochic Son of Man and the New Testament descriptions of Jesus. But the Vatican later took a more cautious stance. The Book of Enoch was not accepted into the canon, partly because the Son of Man passages could create confusion about the origins and nature of Christ. The description of this figure continues with quiet, steady details. Enoch writes that the Son of Man will be a light to the nations. He will open the eyes of the blind. These lines resemble Isaiah's prophecies. But in Enoch, the role is framed within a cosmic setting. The figure sits beside the Ancient of Days. He receives authority before any earthly kingdom rises. This portrayal differs from the New Testament, where Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man while walking among people. The Vatican's concern stems from this difference. In early Christianity, the identity of Jesus as the Son of Man became a central theological point. If another text presents a pre-existing heavenly being with the same title but a different context, it risks creating parallel narratives. In a 1907 Catholic commentary, a scholar wrote that Enoch's messianic figure resembles the Christ in some features but cannot be equated with him. The Church maintains this distinction today. The Book of Enoch describes the Son of Man as possessing perfect wisdom. The manuscript states, "Wisdom was poured upon him." This line echoes ancient Near Eastern imagery, where divine wisdom is given to kings or heavenly beings. Babylonian texts describe Marduk receiving wisdom from Ea in a similar manner. In Enoch, however, the Son of Man does not learn. He already exists in a state of knowing, which reinforces his role as a pre-existent figure. One of the plainest statements in the text says, "He will judge the fallen angels." This detail connects the messianic figure not to human history, but to cosmic order. Early church authorities noted that this does not match canonical scripture, where judgment of angels is not assigned directly to the Messiah. The Vatican therefore treats this section as early religious literature rather than prophetic revelation. The parables of Enoch describe scenes where the Son of Man appears before large gatherings of souls. The language remains quiet. There is no fire, no shouting, no dramatic tension. The text says only that all the righteous and the elect shall stand before him. This calm portrayal influenced parts of early Christian apocryphal literature. The Shepherd of Hermas, a 2nd century text once considered for canon, contains similar scenes of quiet judgment. But as doctrine developed, the Church sought a more defined and unified understanding of the Messiah. The Enochic version was set aside. Archaeological findings provide context for this figure. Fragments of early Jewish writings discovered in the Cairo Geniza mention a heavenly figure called the Elect One, a title used repeatedly in Enoch. These fragments suggest that Enoch's messianic ideas had a wider influence in some communities. They show a period when Jewish thought included multiple interpretations of the coming Redeemer. The Vatican later streamlined these interpretations through canonical scripture. The Son of Man also appears in connection with the Book of Life. Enoch writes that this figure holds records of the righteous. The imagery resembles scenes found in later Christian texts like the Book of Revelation. However, in Enoch, the Book of Life is not a symbol. It is a literal object kept in the presence of the Ancient of Days. This directness contributed to the Vatican's caution. Christian theology does not treat heavenly artifacts as physical objects in the same sense that Enoch describes. Modern scholars debate whether the parables of Enoch developed independently or were influenced by early messianic expectations in 1st century Judaism. Some argue that the Son of Man sections predate Christianity, which would show that early Jewish communities held diverse views about the Redeemer. Others believe the sections were shaped after Christian teachings began spreading. The Vatican does not take a position on these theories. It simply maintains that the Book of Enoch contains historical ideas rather than doctrine. The calm tone of Enoch's messianic passages gives them an unusual character. They describe power without drama, authority without conflict, and judgment without force. The Son of Man sits, watches, and speaks. He acts as a bridge between creation and Creator. Yet his identity remains distant, defined in simple lines that offer no emotional or symbolic explanation. The messianic figure in Enoch continues to draw interest because of this blend of clarity and mystery. The Vatican acknowledges its historical value, but advises that it be read with caution. The lines remain steady. The figure remains seated. His role unfolds in quiet statements that shaped early thought but did not remain in later doctrine. The influence on early Christianity. The Book of Enoch moved quietly through the first centuries of Christianity. It did not appear in church services. It did not stand beside the familiar scriptures. Yet it circulated among certain groups, copied by hand, quoted in letters, and discussed in early writings with a tone that shifted gradually from interest to caution. The influence of Enoch on early Christianity did not come through dramatic moments. It came through small references, simple borrowings, and quiet traces that scholars still identify in the earliest layers of Christian thought. The earliest Christian writer to quote Enoch directly was Jude. In the New Testament, Jude 1:14-15 quotes a passage from Enoch almost word for word. The text says, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones." This line appears in the Book of Enoch in the same steady phrasing. Jude's use of it shows that the book was known among early believers. It suggests that some communities viewed it as meaningful literature, perhaps even inspired, though not formally recognized as scripture. Other early writers also mention Enoch. In the 2nd century, the church father Athenagoras referred to the Watchers when explaining the origin of evil. He did not name the Book of Enoch, but his descriptions match its teachings. Justin Martyr similarly referenced angelic beings who fell by giving forbidden knowledge to humans. His explanation aligns more with Enoch than with any canonical text. These references appear in calm, explanatory tones, showing that the early church did not treat the book as dangerous. They simply used it to support ideas already present in their communities. Tertullian, writing around 200 CE, gave the strongest endorsement. In his work, On the Apparel of Women, he stated that Enoch was rejected by the Jews, not because it lacked authority, but because it predicted the Messiah too clearly. Tertullian wrote that Christians should accept the book if it is judged by the Spirit. His tone, however, was reflective rather than forceful. He acknowledged that others did not share his view. Over time, the broader church did not follow his position. By the 3rd century, hesitation began to appear. Origen, one of the most influential early theologians, mentioned Enoch with respect, but warned that many believed it lacked a clear line of transmission. The church was developing rules for identifying authoritative texts. Works that were widely used in different regions stood a better chance of acceptance. Enoch did not meet this standard. It survived strongly in Ethiopia and in small groups around Judea, but it did not spread evenly across the early Christian world. The Qumran community, active before the rise of Christianity, preserved several Enoch manuscripts. Their interest in the book shows that it was valued in certain Jewish circles, but other Jewish groups did not use it. The Pharisees, who shaped much of early Jewish tradition, favored texts with clear legal and historical structure. Enoch's visions, heavens, and cosmic journeys did not fit this pattern. As Christianity grew from Jewish roots, this uneven reception affected how early Christians viewed the book. By the 4th century, church councils began formalizing the canon. The Synod of Laodicea listed approved scriptures for reading in churches. Enoch did not appear. Later councils followed the same pattern. Their minutes do not explain the exclusion, but scholars suggest several reasons. The cosmology of Enoch differed from emerging Christian interpretations. The role of the Son of Man in Enoch did not align perfectly with teachings about Jesus, and the detailed descriptions of angels conflicted with the growing theological system outlined by writers like Pseudo-Dionysius. Still, Enoch's influence did not disappear. In the writings of early monks, echoes of its ideas appear. The concept of fallen angels teaching forbidden arts shows up in the life of Adam and Eve, and in the Cave of Treasures. These texts describe early humans receiving knowledge in patterns that resemble Enoch's lists. Though not traced directly, the influence is visible in the calm narrative style and simple structure. The Book of Enoch also shaped early Christian imagination about the heavens. Before the dominance of the 9 choirs of angels, some writings described layered heavens, watching angels, and cosmic boundaries. These early ideas gradually faded as church doctrine standardized, but their presence in the earliest centuries shows that Enoch's cosmology helped form the background from which Christian cosmology later emerged. The Vatican's cautious stance developed slowly. Early church fathers did not reject the book outright. Instead, they viewed it as interesting but uncertain. By the medieval period, Latin scholars had access only to fragments. The full text had disappeared from Europe. When Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia in 1773 with complete copies, European scholars rediscovered the book. At that time, the Vatican reaffirmed the traditional position: Enoch holds historical value, but does not carry doctrinal authority. The book's influence remains visible in subtle ways. The idea of angels watching human actions appears in early Christian prayers. The theme of heavenly books recording deeds appears in Revelation. The expectation of a chosen figure who judges nations appears in multiple writings before the New Testament. These ideas existed independently, but Enoch preserved early versions of them. The influence flowed quietly, shaping thought without becoming part of the official canon. Modern scholars examine how early Christians used Enoch to form discussions about evil, judgment, and the structure of the unseen world. The text provided language and imagery for communities seeking clarity. Over time, as doctrine narrowed, these ideas faded. The Vatican acknowledges this history in its commentaries. Enoch is neither condemned nor embraced. It is treated as a window into early belief rather than a pillar of faith. The Book of Enoch's influence on early Christianity remains a story of gentle presence. It touched ideas, shaped vocabulary, and offered frameworks at a time when communities were forming their identity. Its impact came not from authority, but from simplicity, from steady lines that appealed to readers who sought to understand the heavens, the angels, and the quiet boundaries that held the ancient world together. The Church's gradual rejection, the slow removal of the Book of Enoch from Christian use, did not happen through a single meeting or decree. It unfolded across centuries in quiet decisions made by teachers, scribes, and councils who shaped the early church. The tone of this process matched the tone of the book itself, steady, unemotional, shaped by practical concerns rather than conflict. The Vatican's eventual rejection of Enoch as canonical scripture reflects a long history of hesitation rather than sudden opposition. The earliest stage of this shift began with questions of origin. The Book of Enoch had no single, unified Hebrew version preserved across communities. The Qumran fragments proved that parts of the book were old, but the complete Ge'ez manuscripts surfaced only in Ethiopia. Early church leaders preferred texts with clear lines of transmission. Works like Isaiah and Genesis appeared across Jewish regions in multiple copies. Enoch did not. Origen noted this gently in the 3rd century. writing that few have kept this book, and suggesting that uncertainty about its origin made some readers cautious. Another reason for gradual rejection came from its cosmology. Enoch describes layers of heavens, paths of the sun, winds stored in chambers, and stars as angelic beings moving along fixed orders. These ideas reflect early Near Eastern thought, but as Christianity developed, theological teachers favored Greco-Roman frameworks, where the heavens were arranged as spheres. By the 4th century, the cosmological language used by Enoch no longer matched Christian interpretation. Basil of Caesarea wrote that certain ancient books speak of many gates of the sun, distancing canonical teaching from texts that used older models. The portrayal of angels posed another difficulty. Enoch presents angels as scribes, watchers, rebels, and teachers. Some teach metalworking, others introduce astronomy. These roles did not align with the angelic hierarchy that became standard in Christian doctrine. Pseudo-Dionysius, writing in the 6th century, defined choirs of angels with precise functions. His system shaped church teaching for more than 1,000 years. The Book of Enoch's angels did not fit within this system. As canon law solidified, texts that conflicted with accepted structures were set aside gently. The messianic passages also raised concerns. Enoch's Son of Man is described as a heavenly being seated beside the Ancient of Days long before his appearance on earth. This figure judges angels, nations, and kings. Early Christians noticed similarities to Jesus, but the details did not align perfectly with the New Testament. The pre-existent elect one in Enoch could create confusion about Christ's role. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christian teachers began preferring clear, unified accounts of the Messiah. Enoch's quiet but complex figure made this difficult, so the text became less frequently copied. The church councils of the 4th century marked the next step. The Synod of Laodicea created a list of scriptures approved for public reading. Enoch was absent. The council did not issue a condemnation. It simply did not include the book. Later councils, the Council of Carthage in 397 CE and the Council of Rome in 382 CE, followed similar patterns. The omission became a tradition. As scribes copied canonical scriptures, Enoch slowly disappeared from manuscript lists. Its absence became the rule. By the medieval period, Enoch survived in Europe only in short references and scattered excerpts. The complete text vanished from the West. Memories of it lingered in commentaries, where scholars mentioned it as an ancient but unreliable work. The Vatican's position settled into a stable form. Enoch held historical value, but lacked doctrinal certainty. In the 12th century, Peter Comesta wrote that the book called Enoch is known to some, but the Church uses it not. His tone was factual, reflecting the quiet consensus that had formed. When the full manuscript resurfaced in 1773 through the explorer James Bruce, scholars were surprised by its detail and structure. The Vatican examined copies as they became available in Europe. Its stance did not change. In 1821, a Catholic scholar, reviewing the first English translation, wrote that Enoch was valuable for understanding early thought, but cannot serve as a rule of faith. This calm distinction continues today. The Church allows study of the text but warns against treating it as inspired scripture. The Vatican's formal caution rests on several points. The book presents a cosmology that differs from biblical teaching. It describes angelic roles in ways not supported by tradition. It offers a messianic figure whose identity does not fully align with Christian doctrine. It mixes early astronomy with spiritual narrative in ways that complicate interpretation. None of these concerns involve danger or secrecy. They reflect a preference for clarity and unity. Despite its rejection from the canon, Enoch remains significant. It preserves early Jewish thought, records ancient cosmological ideas, and reflects the worldviews of communities like Qumran. The Vatican acknowledges this value. In modern commentary, the book is described as ancient religious literature that should be read with historical awareness. The tone mirrors the calm approach taken across centuries. There is no suppression. There is simply a boundary placed between scripture and early writings that influenced but did not shape doctrine. Today, the Book of Enoch sits outside the canon but inside the history of Christian development. Its pages offer insight into the beliefs that circulated before the Church established its formal structures. Its stories move in quiet, measured lines rising, falling, and settling into memory. The Vatican's gradual rejection reflects a long process of shaping doctrine through texts that aligned with emerging theological frameworks. The book's journey from use to exclusion mirrors its own tone, steady, simple, and unhurried. It leaves behind a record of how early communities understood the heavens, the angels, and the hidden order of the world. It remains part of the conversation, not as scripture, but as a witness to ancient thought, preserved across centuries. As we reach the end of this quiet journey, the Book of Enoch returns to the place it has occupied for centuries, just outside the edges of accepted scripture, yet never forgotten. It influenced early thinkers, shaped ideas about angels, and offered a layered view of the heavens that echoed through ancient communities. Over time, the Church chose a simpler path, setting the book aside, but never erasing it. Today, it remains a record of how early people tried to understand what they could not see. Its pages reflect their questions, their observations, and their search for order in a world they believed was guided by unseen forces. If you found this calm exploration meaningful, consider subscribing to the channel, sharing the video, or leaving a comment below. Your support allows more quiet histories and overlooked texts to be explored in the same slow, steady way. Thank you for watching.